Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, where we share all kinds of tips, advice, and interview guests on all things innovation and leadership in modern marketing. Each episode is a conversation with inspiring people who make wonderful contributions to our knowledge in these areas and spark curiosity and ideas to pursue. Join me, Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and let's get into today's masterclass on this InnovaBuzz podcast.
I believe that the role of leadership when it comes to innovation is really what is important. And that role is not to come up with the ideas all the time. It's to force people to participate by gently calling on them, making sure that they're heard, probing questions in a public environment so other people hear that idea and we fully explore it. And doing that creates a culture of discussion. And without that culture of discussion, there really can't be any sort of sustainable innovations.
Hi there, Innovator. It's great to be back with another episode. I hope you've had an awesome week so far. I trust too that you enjoyed my recent conversations with Azul Turones of the Authors Writing Academy and with Mel Kettle, the communications strategist. Today, I'm really excited to have on the InnovaBuzz podcast as my guest, Sunny Han, who's the co-founder and CEO of Atlas Solutions. Now, Atlas produce Fulcrum Pro, which is software that helps businesses grow their bottom line by improving productivity and optimizing supply chain with clever use of data and some artificial intelligence. Sunny saw businesses struggling with poorly produced software and ill-fitting strategies, and his team set about to develop a solution that was focused on the user and the user journey and also make high-powered technology solutions available to smaller organisations. A quick promotional message from our sponsor, that's InnovaBuzz, where we help coaches and consultants build professional credibility, engage their target audience, and connect with their ideal clients. Now, to help you get real clarity about who your ideal client is, take a look at our Marketing Master mini class. In less than 30 minutes, you'll gain absolute clarity on your ideal client and how you can communicate with them to build and strengthen an enduring, engaging relationship. Access the Marketing Master mini class now at innovabiz.co/Marketing Master. It's completely free and it's accessible without even giving away your email. In our discussion today, Sunny talked to me about some of the challenges in marketing an innovative solution that people may not even know they need yet, and how Atlas have addressed those challenges. We talked about how to have empathy with the customer journey during the user experience, and he shared with us how to build frameworks for robust discussions that are free of politics. Without further ado then, let's fly into the hive and get the buzz from Sunny Han. Hi, I'm your host Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast today, coming to you today from San Francisco in the USA, Sunny Han, who's co-founder and CEO of Atlas Solutions, which is a company that produce software solutions for manufacturing, and in particular, their flagship product is called Fulcrum Pro. Welcome to the podcast, Sunny. It's a great privilege to have you as my guest.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
Rob Brayman, who was our guest on episode 193 of the InnovaBuzz podcast, suggested that we have a conversation with you, Sunny. So big hello to Rob.
Mm-hmm.
Now, your software is all about improving productivity for manufacturers and optimizing supply chain and clever use of data. So I'm really looking forward to learning more about that. I know you do a lot with artificial intelligence, and I'm also keen to find out more about how you go about marketing a product like that. But before we talk about all things software and marketing and AI, give us a bit of a snapshot of your background. How did you get to where you are today, and what were some of the key moments in that journey?
Yeah, a long and windy path. My mother was a graduate student at the University of Minnesota, studying computer science. So from the computers that we had at home and her showing me just a few simple programming languages like BASIC or Lisp, I learned how to write simple programs for the computers we had at home, and that got me hooked. I made websites when I was in middle school and high school, and I did all sorts of technological stuff. But when it came time for college, I wanted to be either a poet or a doctor. So went a very long way around and ended back in technology. So after school, I worked in a variety of fields, from chemical engineering to consulting. But really, the idea and the synthesis of what we're producing right now, which is more advanced technology for smaller businesses, specifically manufacturers, came from that consulting experience, which is where I met Rob. Throughout that experience, I toured and visited over 200 different small manufacturers and noticed some patterns. And the primary pattern is just very few technological advancements and innovations that were ubiquitous elsewhere had made it to the world of small manufacturers. So started the company about 4.5 years ago and have received a lot of really great responses from the market in terms of what our software is able to do for them.
All right. Well, that's, fascinating. So poetry and medicine is kind of two extremes, and you ended up a different path altogether again.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay. Now, with the software, Fulcrum software, tell us a little bit about what the specific problem was that you addressed with developing that software.
Software has gone through a lot of evolutions over time. A lot of the concepts that we're solving now are not new concepts. The concept of lean manufacturing, or of even just MRP or demand planning, these are things that have been thought of and implemented at different organizations since the 70s and beyond. But software in general has made a lot of different leaps. And the software that we're kind of innovating on top of or beyond was primarily architected in the late 1980s, early 1990s, when I was learning how to program when I was a young child. So these systems, I don't mean to speak ill of them. They served a really good market need for a long time. And I would describe them alongside of all the other applications that were developed at that time as innovating the ability to store and report on data. Before that, people had paper, they had different pre-printed templates. Photocopies were an innovation before this, and just being able to have a place where I know this is where a sales order is and I could pull reports on it significantly improved office operations for a lot of manufacturers. So what we're trying to do and getting to that marketing piece is actually a little bit difficult to market. We are essentially a manufacturing ERP system, but we do things so differently that sometimes when we call ourselves a manufacturing ERP system, we get all the negative connotations of what we're trying to fix associated with us as well. So our software handles basically everything from the beginning of a company's operations, taking sales orders, making quotes, making items, bills of materials, routings, all the way to the end, to invoicing. So we handle quite a few things. A lot of the innovations that we've had, when compared to the grand scheme of technology, is really not that impressive. But compared to what exists right now, it really is substantially better than the incumbents. So,
Okay, well, that's a pretty good, pretty high-level snapshot, and there's some great questions that you've raised there in terms of innovation and how to market some innovation and how to communicate the benefits. So tell us what's unique about the Fulcrum software that perhaps other ERP systems don't deliver on.
What I noticed when working with these companies is that many people, business people, Harvard graduates, all sorts of people that work in many different businesses, even in smaller manufacturers in all over the country that we visited, they're accustomed to consumer software. And when I say that, I don't mean consumer software as being worse. It's oftentimes significantly better in terms of user interaction, user experience. People want software that is intuitive. They know how to use their phone, they know how to take a picture, they know how to send a text message. But when it comes time to knowing what their inventory levels are, what the critical pieces of their business mean, how to optimize their scheduling, they have no options right now in being able to get what I would consider really good experiences that are intuitive. They have to read a manual. They have to memorize how to click one menu to another. They have to be careful not to put information here or there, or things might break. And really, one of our focuses is, if we're going to do a lot of stuff with our customers' data, we have to make the experience of entering data as seamless and as ubiquitously amazing as possible, right? So a long time ago, I met a gentleman named Rory Sutherland from a company called Ogilvy, an advertising firm. And one of the things that he convinced me of is that being able to empathize with the customer's behavioral journey is one of the most important things you can do in any sort of product design. So we've tried to bake that into our system as much as possible. And while those might not seem as impressive as the technological advancements we've made, they've made just as many measurable benefits and outcomes for our customers as the more what I would consider hard science or mathematical solutions that we've had.
Yeah, well, I imagine that's a big thing, empathizing with the customer journey throughout the use of the software. And certainly I talk a lot about empathizing with the customer journey in the marketing game. And so for me, part of marketing is actually the product delivery as well, and how the product then performs in the hands of the customer. So that's definitely something that I think is a unique benefit, because a lot of people don't consider that at that point of the customer journey.
Yeah, it's you can make an argument that they're the same thing, marketing and research and development, right? You can try to create a product that people don't know yet, and you have to find a way to get them to realize why it's valuable and different than what's out there. Or you can find something that they already want and try to get them to understand that you have it and you can sell it. But either way, you're doing both marketing and research and development at the same time, almost always.
Yeah, that's right. And having that empathy for the customer and where they're at in their journey helps develop the product, helps fill the need, and then helps do the marketing as well. So I think that's really good.
One of the counterintuitive things that we did, I think, is we actually very much did not hire anyone that was already in the marketplace. We didn't hire anybody from any of our competitors or any of the incumbents. We wanted to make sure we hired really smart people that you worked at Bloomberg or at Google or at Target, and were well trained in understanding process and understanding business, but set them to the task of learning manufacturing and learning software. And it was a long journey, but I don't think we could have come to the innovations and the empathy that we have now had we not really started from a position where we weren't potentially biased to begin with, right? So,
So instead of taking people that knew manufacturing and knew resource planning and said, this is the way you do it, you took people that had the right attitude and had the right technical skills to build software, but didn't know the manufacturing. So they weren't encumbered by this is the way it has to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the challenges that come there are, you have these really smart people who are really used to being very good at their job, and they don't know the manufacturing nomenclature. It's sometimes difficult to get answers out of people that aren't technically minded. Somebody who has worked at a tech firm, they're used to working with other people that understand software. And a lot of times our customers certainly aren't, software developers. So getting to the truth, getting to what the actual root cause is, instead of just taking the surface level pain that's reported back for granted, I think that's where a lot of the magic happens, but that's also where a lot of the difficulty is too.
Yeah. So a bit of a two-edged sword. Mm-hmm. All right. Now, how did you get started with this software, and how did you decide this is an idea worth really pursuing, worth investing time and money and resources into?
Yeah, when I was working as a consultant, kind of as a curious side project, I just looked at all of the vendors and all of the customers for every one of the clients that I was working with. And what emerged was a pattern. All of these businesses tend to work with each other, work with the same customers, work with the same vendors. So the kernel of the idea that these businesses could be connected together to deliver the same value that the stock market got by automating trading between different parties, if we could just connect these businesses together, think about how much more efficient the entire system could be. And so my first challenge, while I was experimenting with other things, I certainly wasn't certain about this idea at first, was to try to see how easy it would be to just integrate with the current incumbents. And while we found ways to integrate with them, it became really apparent really quickly that the platforms themselves were what the problem was. The linking of these businesses couldn't happen without having a better platform. And instead of waiting for one to come around, we set forth to build our own. So we diverted most of our resources into that, and we started just building custom software for companies that I had worked with in the past or we had just met in our journeys of doing research. And we made a few custom applications that were really good, that were well received, and that had measurable results on the companies that we delivered them to. So that was more than enough kind of proof, if you will, that this was going to be worthwhile for us to pursue.
So you kind of build it in stages.
And it might not seem obvious why build it 3 different times. Well, one of the things we also found in our research is that if you look across the field, there is no incumbent that owns a large portion of the marketplace. The big players have maybe 7 to 10% here or a couple of percent there. And if you study it, there's a couple of interesting patterns that emerge. One is that almost every one of these incumbents started with one sub-niche. They maybe started with machine shops, or they started with rubber extrusion, or they started with aerospace. And they made their software very specific for that industry. And they tried to pivot to adjacent industries, and they were almost always very unsuccessful, mostly because it was well tailored just to one industry that didn't maybe apply to anything adjacent to it. And we wanted to make sure that we had enough applicability. So we wanted to get some data points on very different points of the manufacturing spectrum. And the second kind of pattern that emerges is that as these pieces of software evolve and they kind of teach these businesses a way of doing business so that they fit within the software, there's a self-reinforcing effect. The industry learns how to use the software learns the industry, and vice versa. And you actually have this convergence of business processes that's really strong. But if you ask anyone where that came from, no one can really pinpoint it down to anything. And really, it's because that's how the software was laid out. So one of the challenges we really knew we had was, how do we convince people to do something fundamentally new while giving them an experience that's still familiar enough that they're going to make that change, because adoption is really important. So we spent what in retrospect could be seen as too long experimenting with different sub areas of the industry. But if you look at the software that we have now, a lot of the biggest realizations and innovations that we have came from that extended period of time where we really learned really in depth, made ourselves experts to the point where we could run some of these businesses for our customers potentially, that we were able to get to the level of expertise we needed to develop the software we have now.
Fascinating. So the artificial intelligence component of it, give us an example of how that works.
Sure.
And the results that brings.
As a caveat, I certainly wouldn't describe it as what would be mathematically considered an artificial intelligence engine. There's a lot of advancements in the industry, and we use a lot of tools that are out there. But really what we're doing is we're bringing a sort of statistical tree pruning, tree traversing algorithm that works really well to the industry. And really what that means is that the problem of scheduling or even purchasing requires you to think about trillions of potential combinations of how you could schedule one operation before the other, or if you should buy this item to fulfill that order, but it's going to be used by then, but then there's going to be new orders that come about. These problems that seem simple and are actually very simple to solve when you only have a few jobs or a few customers become exponentially more complicated as you add more jobs or add more complexity. So what we're really doing is we're allowing a computer to see more than a human would see, and choosing to look in an area that we know the best answer probably is in. So where our scheduler is really weak is where the problem is simple enough that a human can solve it really quickly. Where our system is really magical is where the problem gets so complicated that the human can't really schedule more than just a few hours or a few days out. And we're able to come up with a really efficient schedule for them many, many days out. So it'd be like solving a Sudoku puzzle. If there's a lot of numbers already filled in, it's not very impressive to fill the last 5 numbers in, right? But
Yeah.
if there's just a few numbers there and we can solve that problem in just a few seconds, and now it starts to seem magical, even though it's the same problem. So that's really what we lend to these customers of ours, is ability to increase throughput through technology. So,
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the marketing of it. You did mention earlier that there were some challenges around conveying the benefits and marketing something that is so new that people don't really have an idea of what it is or what it's going to do for them. So to outline some of the challenges for us, and perhaps let's talk about how you dealt with those.
Yeah, I would consider our company currently still in potentially, under the radar or ghost mode or something like that. We don't do any sort of aggressive content marketing, but in the background, we have a lot of content written. We've been working really hard on this marketing problem, but we've been experimenting mostly with point-to-point contact, people that we meet at events or people that we reach out to or network to or meet through whatever medium. And really, we're trying to test out a few messages. So the effect that we're trying to get is we're trying to get people to understand that it's not the functionality that changes, it's your behavior, it's your process. So much like the most compelling argument for why you should use Slack is that it reduces your email by 75%. That really doesn't speak to what Slack is, right? Slack is a team messaging platform that allows you to talk to people, but to get people to go around thinking that Slack is the same as Skype, because if you've used it, it isn't, or the same as HipChat, and again, if you've used it, it isn't, you have to kind of realize that the real benefit is in a possible world of behavior that you never even considered was possible. Before Slack, 10 years ago, if I told you, you can use this tool and your inbox will go down by 75% and you'll actually be twice as productive, you wouldn't believe me, right? And most people wouldn't. So a lot of our marketing strategy revolves around that same concept. We want to talk about how increased throughput is going to make you more on time. And being more on time is going to reduce the stress that you feel about your schedule. We want you to realize that having a 5% increase in gross margin and being able to do more revenue with the same equipment and overhead will fundamentally change the way that the economics of your business work. And that will result in a lot of both personal and physical changes to the way that you do business. So all of our successful marketing messages that we've tested have revolved around that, or revolved around focusing on the fact that this software helps you with your manufacturing operations. And here is the personal effect that you will feel from a role-by-role basis. And it differs, right? The owner will feel something different than the production manager will feel something different than the person in finance will feel something different than the engineer that's quoting everything. So that has been really what has been the cornerstone of our success in terms of the limited marketing we're doing, and will be the basis of our plan going forward when we start to market more publicly.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I love the analogy to Slack. And a lot of people listening to this podcast would be quite familiar with Slack, but then others might not be. So it's interesting to look at that idea of, yes, there's this software that allows you to basically get out of your inbox and have live real-time communications with your team or with customers or whoever you might have on the communication channel. But it's the behavior that it enables, the change of behavior that it enables, that really is the powerful bit. So I love that kind of analogy. And looking at an enterprise planning system that impacts all the different roles within a business, that really is very powerful if you can communicate the benefits to those different roles, and then of course the results that it brings about for the business as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you do something that is different enough and better enough, the claims start to become unbelievable. And I think focusing on the benefit is really the only way to get people to understand what we're trying to do. And then as they experience it, gets them excited to refer it. Because when you experience something that you were skeptical about, but then you're very wowed by, your propensity or your motivation to share that goes up significantly. So,
Mm-hmm. So who's the target customer for your product? Because you mentioned before that you're not in one specific niche. And part of that, I think, if I understand this correctly, part of that is that having a network of different users gives you a lot of data and stuff that you then, learnings that you then feed back into the system that benefits everybody. But do you have kind of a specific target in mind in terms of getting the message out?
Yeah, if you can, based on exactly what you just said, currently the value that we deliver is it's not that impressive if you're a very small company. The answers can be solved pretty easily just by a human looking at it, right? And when we get into very, very large companies, we have some issues just from a sales perspective of getting a $5 billion manufacturer to change something is just a very different proposition than talking with someone where the owner is your customer, or potentially there's an active buyer that is a CTO or a CIO or maybe a CEO of a manufacturing firm. Our target market is really based on that. It's a company that has 8, 10 minimum employees and maybe 1,500 at the very maximum. And that really is our sweet spot. We're currently working in North America and Canada, but that isn't based on any concerns that we have. We have some plans to do localization to translate things, and we have some opportunities in Hong Kong and other places that are abroad. But our network primarily currently because we're not really doing any sort of public marketing, reaches here in North America. So from a sub niche standpoint, we're focusing on anybody that's making something or helping somebody make something. We have customers that successfully use our system that do aftermarket services. Somebody produces something and they put a powder coating on it, or they paint it, or they do some sort of a treatment to it and send it back. Or we work with component manufacturers and OEM manufacturers and people who are making PC boards. And if you're taking something and doing something to it, and the end result is valuable to somebody else, and you're working with raw materials, by and large, you fit what we're trying to do. So those are the ways that we think about our software. For the most part, other than some specific batch manufacturing, which I would consider to be, like pharmaceuticals or something like that, our value proposition is fairly universal across most of manufacturing.
And one of the things that just occurred to me is there benefit to looking at the software as right down the value chain in terms of starting off with a raw material, and you talked about somebody powder coating. So let's say you start off with the raw material that might be, I don't know, aluminium or steel, that's then extruded or formed into whatever the product might be, that's then powder coated, that's then treated as a next step before it's ultimately sent out to be assembled into something and then sold in the consumer marketplace. So there's, to me, there might be 7 or 8 or 10 companies involved there in the different steps. Is there a benefit to having the software basically manage that whole supply chain across those different companies?
Yeah, that is the ultimate dream. It'll take us a long time to get there, but if I could see the rest of my supply chain more clearly, I could plan better. And I think there's going to be some resistance to sharing your information, and there's some innovations in blockchain technology that'll allow us to anonymously share information, but still give you an aggregate picture of, here's what the total supply chain capacity is for powder coating. I don't have to pick out any one company, but the more data that we have, the stronger that network will be. But in order to get there, we have to nail this problem of actually delivering value to the operations of the manufacturers. And another way to answer your question, I think, is there's a sneaky realization that you have when you start to look into at least North American manufacturing. What you'll find is that by and large, the things that are produced in America are things that are really large and thus not very efficiently outsourced to China, or things that are very small quantity and thus not very efficiently outsourced to China, and things that are very technologically advanced or new and thus not easily outsourced to China, or things that are needed in really short supply time and thus not very easily outsourced to China. So if you think about all that, one of our missions internally that we talk a lot about is that we don't like this concept of iron ore being mined in Canada, shipped to China, smelted, forged, and machined, then made into some subcomponent, sent back to the US, assembled, and then sold in Ireland. I would rather have the iron ore come straight from Canada right into the United States, make the steel here, and then produce the parts and sell it to wherever we need it to go. So if you think about that, and if you think about the goal of connecting everything, we really do hope that increasing the productivity and throughput of local manufacturing will tip the scale of efficiency so that a lot of that work will come back into the United States. So we've had to be really careful about engineering our infrastructure so that work that is done by businesses that aren't in America anymore will still be able to be supported by our software when it does come back here to the United States. So while there's some discussion on whether tariffs will help that or not, that's somewhat irrelevant to us. We want to make sure that we're able to drive that future regardless of the political environment. So,
and clearly there's benefits to having that kind of situation and in terms of local manufacture. And I know when I was in the corporate world, we were looking at doing something very similar for, and this was in the paint industry where you draw in a fairly large number of raw materials from all kinds of different sources, and then you manufacture something in one location, and then you might ship it out to a fairly remote location where it ends up being produced into the ultimate or the final consumer product. And so having the ability to actually place manufacturing where it made the most sense. And in our example, it was where the final consumer product was going to be sold. So that definitely is something that I can relate to. I guess one of the things that, one of the questions it raises for me is how do you manage that across all the different industries or all the different companies that will be involved in that kind of supply chain?
Yeah, they're very different, right? Some companies manage their business on blanket orders. Some contract manufacturers get some kind of loose forecasting, kind of true, and job shops will never make the same thing twice. And they all have very different needs and needs that were served by different pieces of software. So it was a really fun and frustrating puzzle to solve, to come up with user interfaces that allowed for all without favoring one or the other. And it was really fun because when you solve it, it feels obvious and you're like, that's going to be copied by everybody. But I solved it, and there's a lot of satisfaction and almost a sense of gratitude towards being given the opportunity to solve this problem. So those are the things that motivate our team. They're very tough to come by. They're not predictable, but we really work towards outcomes like that. So that is absolutely a challenge, and there are areas where we're better at it than others, but our philosophy is that we're going to work towards making the entire platform from end to end ubiquitously valuable to just about every business model that exists in manufacturing. So a tall order for sure, but for now we've just focused on the places where we believe other systems are very weak, and we have limited resource. We have to focus on something, right? So the areas where we can deliver the most value compared to what's existing in the marketplace seems to be the best place for us, both from a marketing standpoint and from a software development standpoint.
Yeah, well, that's. I think there's a great lesson in that for all businesses, focusing on the gaps that are there in the marketplace with other products, and then looking to solve needs that are actually there and making them in a way that are really user-friendly by understanding the needs of the user and kind of having that empathy model that you spoke about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Sonny, this has been fabulous. I could go on for ages digging into more philosophically around how to build systems like you're working on, but I think it's a good time now to move on to the Buzz, which is our innovation round, and it's designed to help our audience who are primarily innovators and leaders in their field with some tips from your experience. So I've got 5 questions that I'm going to ask you that hopefully you'll give us some really insightful answers today that'll inspire people to go and do something awesome.
Sure.
So what's the number one thing you think anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
The paradigm shift in the way that I think and the way that I've tried to get the whole team at Atlas to think about the Fulcrum product is that when you make a decision as a human being, you don't have just one answer. You have a lot of competing answers in your head, and one bubbles up to the top and wins. And you don't hate on the other answers that didn't win. Sometimes you do. There's some times where you have some psychological trauma, but typically speaking, you don't really feel any sort of negative emotion for the ones that didn't win. Maybe you want to eat steak today and you want to have a salad tomorrow, and one can win today and one can win tomorrow. In most organizations, the way that the organization works is very much like a brain. Everybody has a different experience. I work with this customer, you work with that customer, you worked on this piece of functionality, I worked on that piece of functionality, I wrote some marketing material, you did some invoicing. We all have very different perspectives on what we're trying to do. And when we have too much of a hierarchy, what happens, and too much politics, what happens is that we're not getting an effect where the best idea bubbles to the top. So the biggest realization I've had in the last year is that the only thing that separates us from a billion-dollar software company doing the same thing is not how skilled we are. They definitely have very skilled developers. It really is the fact that we have the potential, a higher probability of being apolitical. And with more politics comes less innovation. So we've really tried very hard to try to keep the organization as flat, unhierarchical, as egalitarian, and as fair and unpolitical as possible. And it's hard, right? We have conflict. And what I've also learned from that is that we're actually really not that good at dealing with conflict. If we benchmark ourselves with our relationship with our friendships aren't really tested nearly as much as they are tested in business, or especially in a startup where you have to try really hard to succeed. So feeling the sense of not wanting to deal with conflict leads to politics, which then leads to lack of innovation. So being able to talk, release tensions, regroup. The military has rituals that they do. Even sororities and fraternities have rituals. All these rituals are there to get you to release the tension that happens with conflict so that you can handle more conflict without hating each other. So lack of politics, lack of tension, and more communication leads to more ideas shared and the best idea bubbling to the top. And that has been the pattern of how the best innovations have happened at our company. So.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, the politics is something that I think is so frustrating and so detrimental to any organization. But like you say, the ability to deal with conflict, I think, is a really good one, because there is an argument that says constructive conflict is a good thing, because if you've got competing ideas to get the best one out, there has to be some sort of conflict in terms of critically analyzing each one. And some people will decide that one is better, and others may decide that another is better, and having the different viewpoints and different perspectives and really discussing those openly can add a lot of value and can lead to a better decision, I think.
Yeah, if you, even other disciplines like architecture, if you ask very well seasoned and creative architects, I think you probably unanimously say, without any constraints, without any conflict, without any sort of boundaries and budgets and things like that, you can't really innovate, because an infinite space is one of the hardest spaces to come up with a good idea, right? So,
yeah. So what's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
Personally, I think just having a very healthy dose of self-skepticism. oftentimes the team says, Sonny, you've seen all these manufacturers, you know all these different systems, just tell us what to do, right? And and oftentimes when I think through that, there are times where the conclusion is that it really isn't a place to innovate. Maybe I just don't see it, but I I believe that doubting your skill, the more skill you have, the more self-skepticism you should have, to make sure that you're not overpowering a fragile and gentle idea that might not be fully developed, but doesn't fit within how you think about things, right? So personally, for me, it's been in resisting the urge to jump to a conclusion that makes sense to me, especially if I've had more experience in that field, not less. And that seems counterintuitive, but has had a pattern in our, in my particular instance in developing new ideas and products. Also, I think another equally good answer is that realizing that a good idea could be the opposite of a good idea. Realizing that a fully open system could be really good at delivering X benefit, but a fully closed system that's controlled could be equally good as well. I think too often we think of things as opposites. If this is a good idea, then the opposite must be a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
And we limit ourselves from a whole slew of ideas that could potentially be good, even if at a high probability of failure exists in that opposite. Not analyzing even the little gems that exist there can limit us into only thinking about certain ideas that we already have.
Yeah. So being open to more possibilities always. Yeah.
Mm.
All right. Now, do you have a favorite resource that you use most often?
In terms of a software tool, no, not like that. But in terms of a framework of thinking, in terms of having a system that generates innovation, is mostly just forced discussion. We have that internally. It frustrates people sometimes, but I believe that the role of leadership when it comes to innovation is really what is important. And that role is not to come up with the ideas all the time. It's to force people to participate by gently calling on them, making sure that they're heard, probing questions in a public environment so other people hear that idea and we fully explore it. And doing that creates a culture of discussion. And without that culture of discussion, there really can't be any sort of sustainable innovation. So if there was a tool that I would use is probably a gentle, forced participation from everybody.
Yeah. So building that culture of discussion, I guess, is what I took out of that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Now, what's the best way to keep a project on track?
If I knew that, I'd be much further along than we are now. But understanding that it's okay to have limited resources is the best way. And realizing that the best answer isn't always one where we try harder. When I was younger, I always thought that writing more words was always better, right? Like if I needed to be more impressive, I had to write more words. And what we found is that if you look at all of the best answers we've come up with, some of those answers came from the fact that we only had a very little amount of time and we were very creative. We came up with something that we otherwise wouldn't have had we had weeks to do it. So breaking a project down into small bite-sized pieces where each challenge can be mutually exclusive from each other, but still tackled in a shorter time frame, allows us to come up with 75 really great small ideas. And those oftentimes don't seem as impressive as one giant great idea that we try to tackle. But the best way to keep a project on track is to realize that those small innovations and things that we can do in a short period of time are just as valuable and keep us on track and get us to that result faster.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of breaking things down into small pieces, and also particularly if you are time restricted, as most of us are, then breaking things down into small pieces allows you to actually make a little bit of progress on something big in a limited time frame that you might have available to you right now.
Absolutely.
So what do you think the number one thing is anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
For me, it's been courage. a lot of the things that I've done that have prevented me from differentiating myself resulted from a lack of courage. I had a good idea, but I wasn't courageous enough to speak up about it. We knew that something was really good, but with some initial feedback of negativity, we didn't try hard enough to try to communicate it better. We just dropped it. So oftentimes there's a lot of things that you do that are different. And the primary way that society works, and we don't have lots of chaos with people fighting all the time, is that we like to fit in, right? We like not to cause too much conflict. But if you think about it, if it is different, fundamentally it has a higher probability of causing some sort of misunderstanding or conflict. And not having the courage to work through that will prevent you from being different everywhere in life. So it's not for everyone, but if it is truly something that you want to do, you want to be different, I see no reason for you to, try to fit in, right?
Yeah. All right. That's great advice. It's a different take on what a lot of people say, which is be yourself. But you've outlined one of the fears, I guess, that most of us have in being yourself, and that's being worried about not fitting in or belonging. Yeah. So great advice. All right. Well, this has been fabulous, Sonny. Where can people find out more about you and more about Atlas and Fulcrum Software, and perhaps even reach out and say thank you for what you've shared with us today?
Yeah, fulcrumpro.com is our website. It shows a lot of things about us. We show real screenshots of our software, real animations of it really working, and we don't hide behind that at all. We don't charge by the user. Our software is unlimited users, and we detail all those things that are different about us, and all those things that were hard for us to do, that required courage for us to do. And you can always email me directly, Sunny like the weather, SUNNY @fulcrumpro.com. And always happy to reach out to help anybody who has a question or just wants to chat.
Great. And we'll have links to those in the show notes as well. So what's the number one piece of advice you'd like to leave our listener for any business owner who wants to be a leader in innovation and in productivity?
Perseverance. Lots of studies have been done that shows that the number one driver of success is really timing. So that shouldn't be interpreted as discouraging, like I got to wait for the right timing to start. Really, what should it be interpreted as is to start early and to persevere. Because the earlier you start, the less likely that you've missed whatever window might be available for you. And the longer you persevere, the higher the probability you'll get to a point in time where that window is open for you. And that, I think, is probably the most sustainable advice that I can give to anybody.
That's great advice. The perseverance part, keep going. If you're really convinced that you're on, that you've got something that is going to add value to your clients, then keep going on that. And it reminds me of the old when's the best time to plant a tree question. And the answer is yesterday, or the answer is 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but the second best time's today, right now. All right. Well, this has been fabulous, Sonny. So last question, who would you like me to chat on a future InnovaBuzz podcast, and why?
Yeah, I'd recommend Zach McGill. He is the founder of a company called Perk Health. Perk Health is a company that's using technology to help people live better lives. They have a really great algorithm that engages with people to slightly nudge them and encourage them into walking a little bit more, living a little bit more healthily, and making a bit better choices. And that engagement between your health and your behavior really is something that I think would have a really big impact to everybody's lives. So he's a really smart individual. He is a personal friend of mine, and also is a big innovative thinker.
Great. Well, we'll get an introduction from you to Zach and reach out to him and have him on the podcast as well. That sounds fascinating.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thanks so much for sharing your time and your insights with us today, Sonny. This has been wonderful, and I've really enjoyed it and learned a lot about how you've approached this quite challenging product to bring to market, but the benefits of which are quite immense, I think. And so thanks for sharing all of that with us. And all the best for the future. I hope things continue to go well and look forward to seeing your growth, and let's keep in touch.
Absolutely. Thanks for your time as well and for doing the things that you do. I've enjoyed listening to some of your other podcasts as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Sonny. I hope you enjoyed that insightful and informative conversation with Sonny and took something away from his episode. There are a lot of lessons about innovation in what Sonny shared, and I love the approach of developing empathy with the product user at the development stage. I'd love to know what you took away from Sonny's episode. Leave a comment below the blog post, which you can find at innovabiz.co/Sonny Hahn. That is SUNNYHAN. All lowercase, all one word, innovabiz.co/Sonny Hahn. You'll also find contact information for getting in touch with Sonny there, as well as links to the Atlas and Fulcrum websites. Sonny suggested that we have a conversation with Zach McGill of Perk Health on a future InnovaBuzz podcast. So, Zach, keep an eye on your inbox for an invitation from us to the InnovaBuzz podcast, courtesy of Sonny Hahn. Remember to check out our Marketing Master mini class at innovabiz.co/Marketing Master. It is completely free and accessible without even giving away your email, but most importantly, in less than 30 minutes, you'll gain absolute clarity about your ideal client and how you can communicate with them to build and strengthen an engaging, enduring relationship. And if you'd like our help to go even deeper into marketing mastery, or our help with podcast production, then send me an email to jurgen@innovabiz.co and we'll set up a quick call to get to know one another, have a conversation, and find out if we're a good fit for one another. Tune in again next week to the InnovaBuzz podcast, where we've got some more fantastic guests lined up, including Steve Sims, the author of Blue Fishing, and Joel Kletke of Case Study Buddy. Stay connected with us by subscribing to the InnovaBuzz podcast at innovabuzz.com/subscribe. innovabuzz.com/subscribe. Make sure you never miss another episode. It would also mean a lot to me if you leave us a review, because what you think matters. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your ideas, your suggestions, or questions you have, so go ahead and share them in the comments below the blog post for this episode. Until next time, I'm Jurgen Strauss from InnovaBiz. Remember, be awesome and keep innovating.